Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me and for supporting AI for biodiversity conservation. I'm Tanya Berger-Wolf. I'm professor of computer science and engineering, electrical computer engineering, and evolution ecology and organismal biology at The Ohio State University, as well as director of a few initiatives related to data analytics, data science, AI, and ecology, biodiversity, and conservation globally. It is my honor and pleasure to be on this stage, sharing at least in name with Maria Mirzakhani and Marie Curie, following in the footsteps of great women scientists and mathematicians, and representing AI that for the first time this year got not one, but 2 Nobel Prizes. So both of them are great examples of interdisciplinary, collaborative, large team research. When AI focuses on a challenge, whether it is in the world and saving the planet or advancing science, we can do a lot. And so with that, I would like to talk about one particular challenge that has been my passion for many, many, many years. You may have seen these dire reports that we're losing biodiversity at an unprecedented scale and rate. When we see the number as 1 million, this is the interactive part of the talk for a second. Is 1 million a lot or a little? That depends, right? How many species are out there total? So throw a number. What is, do you think, the total number of plants, fungi, and animals out there in the world? Total species. Order of magnitude. 100 billion. 1 billion. 100 million. The estimate, which is probably a huge underestimate, but not by an order of magnitude, is about 10 to 15 million. Shocking. 10 to 15 million. Okay, let's be generous. 50 million. The 1 million is also an underestimate. What this says, it's about 10% of the world's biodiversity is threatened with extinction. 10%. That's a lot. We're losing biodiversity faster than we can name the species. And we're losing it mostly in the places where biodiversity is highest. So, why? Right. We've identified kind of broadly 5 major contributors to the loss of biodiversity in the world, and that is not surprisingly, first and foremost, climate change, land and sea use, how we use the planet, overexploitation, pollution, and invasive species. Why does it matter? Why do we care? Because biodiversity provides the very services that we rely on for the clean water and air, for the productive soil, for the food supply that we have, for a lot of the pharmaceutical products, and it is just plain good for our well-being to actually have nature. So, what can we, computer scientists, data scientists, engineers, contribute to addressing this big challenge? Why do we care? Like, what can we do other than go out in the field and maybe put on boots and muddy them? Well, the thing is that biodiversity, with all the policies, with all the ideas of mitigation, has a huge data problem. We actually do not know what we're losing and how fast. The International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List, which is the official organization that tracks the threatened status of the species in the world and is called the biodiversity monitor of the planet, of about 160,000 species that they monitor. These are just the species that they monitor threatened with extinction. Notice, by the way, up on top, how biased the set of species, the list of species is. The goal to assess of fungi, for example, right now only about 800 species of fungi are assessed, right? And they're probably by far one of the largest groups, other than beetles. Of the 160,000 species that are being monitored, about 22,000, their official conservation threatened status is data deficient, meaning we cannot make any determination. We do not know what's going on. No idea, nothing. And about 66,000 more, their population trend is unknown, so we don't know whether our interventions are working or not. And these are not obscure species. Killer whales, orcas, the biggest dolphin in the ocean, hard to miss, data deficient. Nothing. Polar bears, iconic conservation species, population trend is unknown. If we don't know what's going on with these ones, what hope do we have about the beetles that actually do matter for biodiversity and the health of our ecosystems, and fungi, and plants, and everything else? So that's where we can contribute most immediately, right? Because over the last 20 years, there has been an explosion of technology that allows us to monitor, collect data about the world. This is the remote sensing from satellites, autonomous vehicles on the ground, underwater, on the ground, and in the air, on-body sensors that can monitor everything from the GPS to your heartbeat and the position of the head. Not yours, well, yours too, but animals mostly. Stationary sensors such as motion-activated camera traps, trail cameras that take pictures when there's motion, acoustic sensors, and eDNA, the environmental DNA that can sample the species at scale, and even these devices. How many of you have taken a picture of a living organism in the last week? Raise your hand. Come on, don't be shy. Okay. For those who did not raise their hand, may I remind you that humans are living organisms? All right. So with that, there is tons of data about the natural world. So problem solved, right? We're done. Moving on. Well, not quite. So top left is the map of the biodiversity of the world. The redder, the higher the biodiversity. So notice that clearly oceans have no biodiversity, right? We actually have no data. The bottom left, this thing, which, right, wrong screen. The bottom left is the map of the observations of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. This is the official biodiversity data for the world. Notice the bias. Not only that there's very little going on in the ocean, but it's almost complementary to the actual biodiversity hotspots. Same thing for the top right, which is iNaturalist, the highest citizen science observation platform for nature, and the bottom right, which is eBird, the observation platform for birds. So not only there is the North American and Western Europe bias, there are no oceans, obviously, nothing going on there, but there is a high correlation to data availability, if you zoom in quite a bit, to even to socioeconomic status. So what we have data is not where the nature is, it's not where the biodiversity is, but where the humans are. And not only that, where the rich humans are. There's a high correlation with his income, average income per zip code for that data. So this is not, we need to, first and foremost, we need to fill the gaps in this data. And then we need to make sense of this data. So we have the challenge with data, the biases, and then even with the data that we have, AI is needed to make sense of it. So today, one would claim that we can take an image and we have off-the-shelf methods that can find all the images that contain animals, find where the animals are in those images, detection and localization, put a bounding box around them, do species classification, posture estimation, and even individual identification. Biometrics, face recognition, humans, problem solved. So the problem is here is that if we go to the same biodiversity map of the world and overlay the map of AI production, we see the same kind of bias, not surprisingly, right? That most of the AI that is produced in the world is produced in complete absence of the biodiversity context. So you cannot actually take off-the-shelf methods. You actually have to work hard to produce methods that work in biodiversity context. And so with these two challenges, data and understanding, right, making sense of that data and connecting it to biodiversity drivers and the impact of biodiversity loss, as well as mitigating the resources that are enormous. There's an enormous gap for biodiversity already in terms of resources. And then on top of it, if we use AI just without any consideration for resources, we're going to exacerbate that gap. So AI that we deploy here cannot be that high resource use, expensive, high expertise, high infrastructure, high environmental impact type of AI. And then translating it into policy and action. All of this is outlined both not just the challenges, but the opportunity that AI has in this space in the report produced by intergovernmental agency, Global Partnership on AI, that started as a partnership of 29 governments, and now it has joined OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, AI arm, and focuses on various aspects of AI. One of them is AI and biodiversity. So we're part of this report that really kind of goes into the challenges, opportunities, and risks. I want to point out one particular risk of AI, the increasing environmental impact of generative AI. I want to be very, very clear. This is not the general AI. This is generative AI. This is not the typical models that use even millions of parameters. This is billions of parameters, because the smallest generative AI model uses billions of parameters. Not only in terms of carbon footprint, this is the training, estimated CO2 emissions from training GPT-4 is on the far left, compared to a flight that some of you may have taken from San Francisco to New York. On the far left, so far right versus far left. But it is also electricity and water. So the use of water for training GPT-4 by Microsoft in Iowa, which is where it was trained, jumped by 70%, according to Microsoft's own report. Google estimated 30% jump during their training of Gemini, and so on. It is not just for training, for inference as well. Estimated about 5 to 50 uses of ChatGPT, not even visual, ChatGPT text, uses about a bottle of water. No generative AI was used in producing these slides. So that's the question we have to ask ourselves: why and when should we use this, right? This is before even using CO2 emissions. NOAA, for example, said they cannot use current large models for climate on a daily basis because they're just consuming so much resources. So we have to scale down, we have to think carefully, right? Generative AI, I want to point out, is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of AI that is needed and deployed in biodiversity, and it has to be used responsibly, not just for AI use, AI for AI's sake, but AI in support of making decisions. If it does not make a difference, we do not use it. So let me show you a couple of examples where AI actually does make a difference. So one of them, and this is starting from the very cutting edge of research, literally hot off the press, because we just submitted some of it last week to CVPR, the main computer vision conference. So this is coming out of the Imageomics Institute. This is National Science Foundation supported institute that I lead to establish a whole new field of science. Imageomics, so the omics, the biology from images, particularly focusing on traits and phenotype directly from images. Of course, using AI and machine learning and computer vision. We're talking about images, right? So the goal is not just to be able to say this is the species of bird, But this is the species of bird because it has yellow belly, black behind the beak, and it wobbles when it walks. And here's the distribution of the amount of yellow on its belly throughout its range, and here's how it's connected to the different types of habitat, and here's how it's changing over the course of the last 2 decades because of the changing conditions, and so on and so forth, right? So really connecting it all the way through traits. So the first thing, if we're going to do foundation models, if we're going to invest a lot of resources, as was pointed out in the previous panel, we have to do it once, and we have to do it well, and we have to do it for a purpose, because everything else from that point on has to be fine-tuning. We should not be training foundation models over and over and over again. This is massive amount of resources. So we produced the first foundation model for the tree of life, purpose designed to include biological information, in this case taxonomy, and showing that when you do this and you do it right, so it's trained, this first version is trained on 10 million images for 450,000 species that represent about a quarter of all named species out there. We're now building up the second version. Again, carefully, we're not going to train it until we have all the data that we need to train it, and that's going to include all named species and then some. So the advantage of it, it's not that just you can do classification a lot better, but you can do zero shot. You can do species that have not been observed in training. You can do species from drawing. You can do the 2 to 3 million species of beetles, majority of whom have not been named, and really start using it for detection of new species that have not been classified at all. So we can start catching up, at least on the monitoring side, of knowing what we're losing, or at least figuring out, early warning signs. And talking about this, one of the first thing we asked, from biologists, what do you need? Not only just, so the two things, one is being able to name all the species from variety of modalities. I take a picture, I want to know what's there. I take this, collect all these beetles, I know about half of them are new species. Tell me at least to the genus level. I want to be able to do this higher up in the taxonomy. The other part is, give me the distribution of traits. And so this is the one first kind of generative AI use, is using taxonomy information in this massive model. We can flip it then into the generative mode based on the clip embedding, and then using the same taxonomic hierarchy from the class to the order to the family to the genus and species, generate distribution of traits, potential as a hypothesis within the species. Here's the real, the last column is the actual real. This is the paper that was submitted last week. And so nothing off the shelf that is in absence of biological context will give you anything even close, right, in terms of species. Not only that, by adding phylogeny, not taxonomy, the evolutionary context, you can now start placing mutations and generate what ancestral species may have looked like, right? And you can verify this. And so now we really can ask, when did potentially, at what evolutionary time, who are the ancestral species where this mutation on this fin happened, where the tail went from split to fused, and maybe in a little bit we'll start generating images of species that are extinct. By the way, this is not what they looked like. We now know that they had feathers. So this is the wrong generated image, right? Because it's in absence of relevant biological information. And moving then from generative AI, which is, again, tiny fraction, and it is generating hypotheses, we can really get to the interpretive aspect of it. Not only this is the species of bird, but this is the species of bird because, and so we also have the first interpretable transformer for trait discovery that is able to highlight the pixels of the image that are relevant for making the determination that this is, in this case, painted bunting, from any angle, from any perspective, as you can see in the first 3 rows, and highlight what you would see in a field guide, that it has blue, that the head is important, the color of the head, the color of the neck, the chest, the belly, and the tail, the shape of the tail are important for determining that it is a painted bunting species. So we can now start generating field guides automatically, again, for based on traits and highlight for visual recognition. To translate all of it into actual deployed solutions, another National Science Foundation and Canadian NSERC co-founded Center on AI and Biodiversity Change. This is a global climate center that brings together researchers and practitioners throughout the world, from North America to Australia, to contribute AI-enabled tools and analysis that describe impacts of climate change, one of the drivers of biodiversity loss, on species and habitats, and help assess whether what we're doing in terms of interventions actually works. And we do this by focusing not on the things that we already know, where we already have data, but really developing tools that can move us towards the unobserved, under-monitored, underestimated, rare species, cryptic species, vulnerable ecosystems, ecosystems that are changing super quickly and do not have time, maybe, to adapt to the conditions that they have never experienced before, such as the increasing scale and frequency of disaster events, fire, floods that are happening here in New York City for the first time in almost ever at the scale that we're having, right? Because of drought. Fire, drought, floods, and hurricanes. It feels apocalyptic a little. So how do we take the solutions such as BioClip, such as these big foundation models, and actually deploy them? It takes more than just a good algorithm. So an example here, one of the colleagues from the ABC, AI and Biodiversity Change Global Climate Center, they developed an insect camera trap. So insects are not typically organisms that are being captured in those trail cameras. They're typically animals, vertebrates, like big animals. So how do we use that technology to really focus on taxa that we haven't sampled, where we don't have data? Right? This is a specialized camera trap that attracts insects, as the moths, during the night with a fluorescent light, and automatically activated also by motion, takes pictures, and then they build the entire machine learning pipeline to detect, localize, identify species, and then even suggest flagging new species. This is where you need a good foundation model fine-tuned, right? So we have, these kinds of pipelines that can take all these millions of images and get it all the way to the species, even new species. But wait, there's more. We can also take it down to individual animal. So not only zebra, giraffe, whale, or turtle, but Zippy the zebra. Ooh, there was a missing thing there. Zippy the zebra, Joe the giraffe, Willie the whale, and Terry the turtle. Anything striped, spotted, wrinkled, notched, including the shape of a whale's fluke or the dorsal fin of a dolphin, are the biometric features that identify uniquely every animal, each animal. You have them. Your fingerprint, the shape of your ear, the pattern on your of your eye, the iris, right? So each one of us is unique. Each animal is unique. The combination of that uniqueness is what makes the resilience of biodiversity possible. It also allows us to monitor biodiversity less invasively without putting those GPS collars to track animals, to count them, to see who is showing up, interacting with whom. So that is the platform that we built that Shri mentioned, Wildbook. That's a platform that uses individual ID from images for a variety of species, ranging from marine to terrestrial. One of my favorite and one of the recent additions, well, relatively recent, is this weedy and leafy sea dragon. That's the seahorse, that bottom right. It's an alien, I swear. But no, it's a seahorse related. It's an indicator species for coral reefs. And yes, everyone is uniquely identifiable. But of the species that are on the top left, we have whales and dolphins. And in fact, sorry, in fact, the entire data set of North American whales from Noam Boehm is on our platform that is a platform of the nonprofit WildMe that Sri mentioned, that recently has merged with a big AI for conservation nonprofit, Conservation X Labs. And so, any guesses what's one of the more recent additions to the Wildbook species? No? Come on, class, you have not listened. Orcas, killer whales. So about a year and a half, killer whales have come up on the Wildbook platform, and guess what? We have just about enough data for the Species Commission for IUCN Red List to reassess the extinction risk status for killer whales so they're data deficient no more. That is the power of data. And in fact, for whale sharks, using Wildbook's data, the Species Commission, which is part of the shark collection of Wildbook, and we have more than 22,000 uniquely identified sharks swimming around the world. The Species Commission for IUCN Red List for whale sharks did get together and using that data did reassess the conservation status and the population trend of whale sharks and change it from vulnerable to endangered and the population trend from stable to decreasing, not because the species were doing worse, but because they had the right data to make the right determination, and that the change in the status, one word, triggers policy, protection, resource allocation, and may change the course of this species. Together also with deeper understanding of the biology of the species, the most comprehensive article was published by 37 authors who met through the pages of Wildbook, because there's not one project, not one organization that has information, the entirety of information, even about one individual whale shark. It is only by sharing data, by putting together all our little pieces of data, that we can truly put the global picture of a global species that can travel 5,000 miles in its lifetime. On a regular basis, on a yearly basis, it turns out. All right? So I hope you saw some examples of how AI can truly contribute to mitigating, filling in that data gap by focusing on different taxa, different locations, thinking differently, bringing understanding, and actually reducing the need for resources if done right, and changing policy and action that ultimately actually has to be done not by computer scientists, but by conservation protection professionals and managers who are going out in the field and doing the work. And so I'm standing here in front of you, but I represent an entire large community of students, researchers, practitioners, volunteers, and yes, those conservation professionals who go out, take the algorithms, take the methods, spend the time to tweak them, to make sure they're usable, and deploy them and use them as tools to protect our planet. Because when we succeed, not if, we have no choice. The payoff, the benefits are enormous to us all. And I hope you join me. Thank you.